Good morning, everybody. Hello again. And rather than me just sort of quickly, I'm just going to ask each of our panelists to just quickly run down the line, say a little bit about themselves, and then we'll get to our first question, and we'll start at the far end with Tim. Come on, work this way.
I date to the rotary telephone, so I'm really going to give you good insights here today. It's great advancements for me from dialing up to actually touching screens. I am Tim Powers. I'm the chair of Summa Strategies, managing director of Abacus Data. I guess I'm the blue-colored person here for this panel today and have a history with the conservative.
Hi, my name is Vandana Qatar, B for shorts. I'm a political strategist, former advisor to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, which is why I think I'm here. But my day job is I'm head of communications for DEI and ESG for TD Bank.
I'm George Soul. I'm former director of communications for the federal NDP, and I was the director of digital strategy for Premier Rachel Notley. So that makes me the orange guy. I'm a government relations and communications strategist.
And I'm nonpartisan. I don't know what I'm doing up here.
What color should Christine have?
My name's Christine Van Gyn, and I am the litigation director with a legal charity called the Canadian Constitution Foundation. And I'm also the host of a national broadcast television program called Canadian Justice. So I think I'm the civil libertarian on the stage.
So you can be the judge too. If there's any fights here. And I'm David Aiken again, the chief political correspondent for Global, and I'm multicolored. I guess maybe I mentioned this when we had a call, of course, to sort of figure some things out, and it was about the time that Elon Musk was exercising the power that he's exercising in the new administration. We're seeing a lot of the quote unquote tech bros in the States sort of align very quickly. Many of them align very quickly with Donald Trump. Of some note, just for those who were, the geeks, Bill Gates has a new book out, Source Code. I don't know if you've read it yet, but Bill was donating to Kamala Harris and is doing the podcast circuit talking about how he's going to engage. And Bill Gates, force perhaps for good, is something that maybe at one point in our lives we may not have thought, but he's out there trying to preserve access and do some things there. Tech bros, though, Tim, let me start with you. Do you see, is there a digital lobby? Is there like tech titans in Canada? Might they be pushing for something with a Poilievre government, a Carney government? Is there such a lobby on this side? It might be, the Rogers TELUS sort of thing.
I feel like you're setting me up there.
I might
be a good host. So look, any good panel has a bit of a TMZ moment. So here's your TMZ moment. Elon Musk went to Queens. While at Queens, he dated my sister's roommate. Hey, so I've got a little bit of dirt on old Elon. Apparently, not guy. The relationship didn't last long, about 2 months. And let's just say that my sister's roommate has the same view today as she did then of Elon. That wasn't flattering. Now, I'm sure he's a lovely person. Not. Is there a tech bro lobby? Yeah, there is. I mean, look, just again, today, what's the hot online debate today? And I'm using a dated term online. I realize that when I'm saying it, but Shopify and Kanye. For a multitude of reasons, whether it be Toby Lutz, whether it be Elon Musk, whether it be many others, people who have platforms are recognizing the power of those platforms. You can judge for yourself whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, but they are certainly flexing their muscles as press barons did years ago. Is there a lot of difference between the Lord of Fleet and Elon Musk in some ways in terms of the way they're trying to exercise opinion? I'm not very favorable of a lot of the opinions. So yes, most certainly there's a formal use of technology, there's informal alliances, and you're also seeing younger politicos who have grown up with alternative media and these platforms who are embracing alliances within for their own good. That makes sense from a political engagement perspective. The bigger concern is from perhaps a moral and a legalistic perspective as to what is actually happening.
Vantan, I want to put it a little bit differently to you because Prime Minister Trudeau, Justin Trudeau, the Liberal leader in 2015, probably won that election because of his ability to use digital platforms for good, presumably. So give me a sense from then, and he's pretty tech savvy. He understands where people are getting their stuff. So give me your sense about the same sort of thing. Is there some things that tech wanted from a Liberal government? Is there some things you'd expect that they may want from a Poilievre government?
Yeah, absolutely. I think although innovation digital platform wasn't part of our platform necessarily, I think we signaled it really early on with like having a minister of innovation. I worked for Nappy Baines at the time, so we traveled to like Palo Alto, we talked to a lot of these tech people, the same people who are now lobbying Mr. Poilievre, we sat and we had these conversations with. I think what happens over time of government, maybe we felt dissatisfied with the pace. Government can be a little slow, as we all know, understatements, but they want a different pace. And I think as things come up for the government, whether it was COVID-19 or in Ukraine, priorities change, right? So they don't see the same focus, and things change. I do think that tech bros, there is an attempt to do that. Some people want to talk about lack of growth and productivity, but I do think they see how Musk and Zuckerberg and others capitalize on their popularity. However, I think the difference is with Musk and Zuckerberg and Bezos, they are like household names. Like all of us have probably ordered from Amazon, probably looked at Facebook, Instagram at some point, maybe even 100 times already this morning. I know I have. But so like their influence is greater, like how they use their algorithms, what they send to you. I think that's different, and I think people kind of see that and see what they've been able to build and admire it, and they want that, or they kind of enter people's homes in a way that I don't think Toby. Lute, yeah. I didn't get that line out of him either at all. But in a way that they won't. But I think they're trying to attempt to do that. What I think that as a government, what we kind of missed out on is after a few years, we're not as digitally savvy. You get a little tired. Like even I, like every campaign I did, I remember we didn't have Instagram, then didn't have TikTok, and then there's so many new things, and you stay on top of that. And if you're not on top of that, then you kind of lose that audience.
I want to just, for those who were around for Michael Geist's presentation, I'm going to broadly say the choice for Canada, and excuse me, Michael, if I'm doing this, that when it comes to some of the issues we're going to face, AI, regulation, any privacy, there's the EU model,
yeah,
and then there's the deregulate, break everything fast Trump model. And do you see a liberal, we don't really know what Mark Carney might do, or Christopher Freeman for that matter. Do we see liberals sort of, it seems to me from what the Prime Minister is saying right now in Paris, he's sort of looking more towards an EU model. I don't know if that survives.
I mean, he's not here much longer.
That's right. Good point.
I think whoever the next prime minister is going to show a break. And I think liberals, both Democrats and small L liberals, are learning that some of these institution and social norms people are tired of because they're not actually able to deliver what people want. So I think there's a middle ground. I don't think you don't have to just be breaking things, throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think there's good things to take and things to be like, you know what, sometimes we have to reevaluate how we look at things. And that's how innovation comes through. And I think that signal will be really important.
Christine, you had a point, Melissa.
Yeah, so I just want to step back and follow up on something Tim said, because he actually might be more online than other people in this room if they're not up to date with the Kanye Shopify scandal. So I want to explain
It's that 9-year-old guy.
So for those of you who have not been following this, it is only like a 2-day-old issue, I think. During the Super Bowl, Kanye West put up an ad in the United States where he said go to Yeezy.com, which is his website for his clothing line. And when you go to Yeezy.com, there is a 404 message with one item for sale listed as HH01, as in Heil Hitler 01. And the item for sale is a white t-shirt with a swastika on it. And the sort of Canadian connection, which, I mean, I think I don't even need to say how deplorable and disgusting and upsetting that is for so many people in this room and in the world. It's inexcusable. The connection to Canada is that it's Shopify who is the platform that does the sales, and Shopify sort of famously has this commitment to being a neutral platform that doesn't make moral judgments on the items that they sell on their platforms. They do have some restrictions. I actually went through this last night to look at it, and I think until June of 2024, they actually did have a policy on, I think it was called hateful content. I don't quite remember the way they phrased it, but they removed that in 2024. And I think the lesson, sort of as a civil libertarian for us, there's a few things to take away from this. So, of course, my position on selling a swastika is that that's a terrible thing to do. It's also not illegal. It's not a criminal offense to sell a swastika. Swastika is not an illegal symbol, even though we as a society need to condemn it and call it out for how disgusting it is. It does not rise to the level in the criminal code. It could in certain contexts, if you were using that symbol as a part of willful promotion of hatred or willful promotion of anti-Semitism or incitement to hatred, but just as a standalone item that would not rise to the level of hate speech prohibition. The sort of issue I have as a civil libertarian is that the definition we understand of hate as a society is extremely malleable. And I think that the definition or the code of conduct or whatever they call it on Shopify's website changed last year when they were under some scrutiny for selling some other items that are way less close to the line than this item is. And because of this public misunderstanding of what actually constitutes hate speech in the criminal sense in Canada, they changed that code, and now we're left with an item that I think the executives who are no longer with Shopify said under the old code that would not have been permitted. Under the new one, it is. This experience is, of course, going to test that commitment to freedom of expression that Shopify has. I have no doubt that the executives at Shopify do not like that this is being sold. They are not anti-Semites. The president of Shopify is Harvey Finkelstein, who has donated millions of dollars to Jewish charities, but has referenced the work that the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Association, did in the 1970s defending the free speech of Nazis in Skokie, Illinois, which is one of the ACLU's kind of most famous or infamous cases, depending on how you look at it. So I think the lesson for us from that story, from a civil liberties perspective, is the concern that many civil libertarians have about the malleability of the concepts of hate speech and how those concepts are being drawn into legislation like the Online Harms Act. So I hope that's a useful segue and a topic I didn't want to talk about.
Was
Oh,
it taken down, Mike?
Okay.
Oh, there we go.
Even more online than Tim Powers.
Okay, we're breaking news. Breaking news over in the left corner. Thank you, Mike. We're going to come back to some stuff about hate speech, disinformation. I think you'll be particularly valuable to help some people think through those issues. But George, I want to talk to you about New Democrats sort of in this space.
Somebody does.
Yes, there you go. Yesterday, Jagmeet Singh said, yeah, he'd put 100% tariff on Teslas. If you've been following Charlie Angus, the MP, the NDP MP from Timmins,
James Bay.
Thank you, Timmins James Bay. He's leading the resistance, right? He's out there leading the resistance. And I can see New Democrats, I don't know where things will come out in a platform, but I could definitely see New Democrats standing up with a fist saying, no, we're not going to be pushed around by tech bros or big corporate interests. Am I reading that about right?
Well, yeah, first of all, to Michael Geist, I've worked a long time with Charlie Angus, some days very much on side with Michael, other days upsetting him quite a bit, as Democrats are wont to do, and especially Charlie is. I think, the oligarchy is something that I think is an easy target, and it's something that, as we work through governments, helping out their friends more and more and having billionaires have more and more influence, that's a place where progressives tend to have an easy and natural place to want to push back against. Mm-hmm. I think, going back a little bit to your first question and along with this one is like the difference to some extent is the financial influence that these billionaires can have, right? I mean, Elon Musk spent $250 million to help elect Donald Trump. That kind of direct influence isn't possible here, but we have heard Elon Musk just kind of wanting to play with democracy, right? We know he's doing it in Europe. He's been open about it in Germany. He's talked about how he supports Pierre Poilievre here. And I don't want to imply that Pierre Poilievre's calling up Elon and saying, help me out, but I'm saying Elon is saying, I want to help these conservative parties win elections. And by just tweaking their algorithms, they can do it in a big way. I mean, as Tim was saying, this has always been the case to some extent. Like William Randolph Hearst owned newspapers and pulp and paper plants, so he made sure that we never used hemp to create paper, right? So we cut down forests because the billionaire wanted us to go that way. Henry Ford, in addition to being an inspiration to Adolf Hitler, also wanted to make sure that the internal combustion engine is what moved forward, so we never got the hydrogen engine and you made it sound dangerous. I mean, people have always done these things to help themselves get richer. And it's certainly because of the regulations we have in Canada around financial influence on political parties, it's more limited. But online, they get to go around that. And while he doesn't necessarily have to give more money so the Conservatives can advertise more, he can just make sure that everyone who's on Twitter in Canada just sees more of Pierre Poilievre. And I think that is the kind of thing that is a natural, never mind a strategic, but just a natural place for New Democrats to say, we need to fight against this.
And we have seen, if you have been paying attention, there is some pretty nasty back and forth between Pierre Poilievre and Jagmeet Singh right now. The Conservatives are running ads accusing Jagmeet Singh of, quote, being a sellout, waiting for his pension. They're upset because Jagmeet has not brought down the government that they both hate. If you get all that, it's been something else. But that has been one of Jagmeet's line, is that he's Pierre Poilievre is Elon Musk's buddy. We'll see how that plays out in the Canadian electorate. We're going to see, just like the last 4 or 5 elections, the space where this is going to be fought is, elections are on your phone now. They're not, a town square where people are standing up giving a speech. And then we get into issues around disinformation, misinformation. And Christine, this is where I want to see if you have some thoughts. We know that we're thinking ahead to a potential Conservative government. The polls are still pointing towards that way. We saw under Andrew Scheer and again under Pierre Poilievre, Conservatives believe that free speech in this country is under attack, mostly in a university setting. We saw Poilievre hang out for a while with Jordan Peterson and express some sympathy for his point of view. So there may be some rules around speech, but then we also have, some people think there ought to be some rules around speech to guard against disinformation and misinformation. And that's probably, do you spend some time thinking about that and the sort of rules we ought not to have, the sort of rules we ought to have?
Yeah, I don't just spend time thinking about it. We spend time litigating this.
Right.
So one thing I wanted to also mention is, so Professor Geist talked about how heritage had damaged the platform's relationships with government to address disinformation and misinformation. And I would say the government has also damaged that relationship with the public. The public has lost a lot of trust in what constitutes misinformation and disinformation.
And this is coming out of the Freedom Convoy, et cetera.
Honestly, everything. It's not just that, which is a case we also are litigating. That's a big freedom of expression case. I spent a lot of time litigating freedom of expression. I think that this is the number one concern among our supporters consistently every single year that we survey them, and it's not even close. It is the number one concern. We were in court last week for 2 days on issues of freedom of expression. We'll be in court in 2 different cases. We'll be in court for 4 days at the end of the month on different freedom of expression cases. It is a huge issue. It is not just on university campuses. I'm in Ottawa, so I'm sure the Freedom Convoy was not popular here, but the government's use of the Emergencies Act, the court found that it violated the right to freedom of expression. There are a lot of things that the federal government does in terms of legislation that have impacted the right to freedom of expression. It's not just the federal government, it's provincial governments, municipal governments, it's professional regulators who are empowered by statute. It's everywhere. There are huge issues related to freedom of expression. Now, on misinformation and disinformation, I obviously understand that these are real problems. I am not naive to the fact that there are hostile foreign governments and actors who try to influence our elections. I am concerned that the government's propensity to lie to its citizens, governments of every stripe, the provincial governments, federal governments, municipal governments, and it's not just a modern phenomenon, it's throughout all of history, governments lie to their citizens, and that today's great truth was yesterday's blasphemy. But misinformation, disinformation, these are real issues. The ability to address them has been undermined by the government's own approach to this. Now, the Hague Commission on foreign interference had a recommendation recently. I think it was recommendation 11 of their report. The exact wording was sort of hard to follow. I think she said create a new entity, which I don't know what that means, to give and receive intelligence and have authority to, quote, interact with platforms. I don't know what interact with. So this is a proposal that could be good. It could be bad. As a civil libertarian, I have my concerns because who defines what misinformation and disinformation is? Who defines what interact with means? No one trusts these terms anymore. And there's a vulnerability to mission creep. And from my perspective, what I don't want is to give the government a gateway to collect information about citizens who are expressing ideas that are unpopular with the government of the day. So whatever is done on this issue needs to be precise and circumscribed. We had a case on this, I think, 3 years ago now. In 2019, the federal government amended the Canada Elections Act to prohibit, publication of misinformation with the intent of influencing an election, and it didn't define what misinformation was, and it removed the requirement that the publication of the misinformation be knowingly. So the scenario we kind of talked about was, grandma posts on Facebook, everyone should vote for Andrew Scheer because he was such a great insurance agent, which, I don't know if that would.
That's an out and out falsehood.
I don't know if that would convince anyone to vote for him, but of course, it turns out he was not an insurance agent, which I don't quite understand why there was misinformation about this. But she could have been, for publishing that, for the part that's the intent of influencing the election would be the vote for him because he was this thing that wasn't true. She could be subject to, I think it was 5 years in prison and a fine of $50,000. Now the government has said we wouldn't have used it that way, but you shouldn't have a law that permits that type of absurdity and chilling of speech. And we were successful in having that struck down.
I want to talk about something that's happening real time in the Liberal leadership race with Christopher Freeland's campaign. We just saw, you may have seen that we have what's called the Rapid Response Mechanism. It's a unit of Global Affairs Canada. It is ostensibly set up to warn of disinformation, misinformation. And it was a significant subject, how it should work, of the Hope Commission's work. But we saw it in action last week when they came out in public and say Christopher Freeland's campaign has been the target of Chinese proxies spreading disinformation on WeChat. Does that make us feel better that they're doing that? That again, it's the idea is shine a light. We'll all know about it. We can do something about it. But I don't know what when you saw that, what was going through your mind about that?
My first thing was like, oh, it works. When we put this together, I remember, I think 2015, I can't remember. Actually came through. I was like, is this going to be able to do this? And it did. And it informed the public. And I saw on Twitter, I'm like, it came out on Twitter. And I left government now like almost 3 years ago. I'd never seen that before. So in that way, yes. And if you know about things, you can guard against them. And I think going back to your point, the other thing I'm going to talk about from disinformation is that we do have to be honest that we do have foreign actors who want to influence our elections. They want to cause disarray. They want to share misinformation. We do have to battle that. I think there's more than one way to deal with that. I agree. You need to have trust in your institutions, and I think there has been people worried about the freedom of expression and the heavy-handedness of it. So I think there has to be more public buy-in because people are just distrustful of institutions right now in general, and we have to rebuild that trust. So I think that is real. What I actually want to think about is how we educate people and the next generation. I teach my kids to question everything they see online. Every beauty thing you watch, I'm like, that is not real. Like I need like even things like that, but just having people question, because now, and you're a journalist, anyone with a microphone and earbuds can be a journalist and can have their own podcast and can share whatever they want to share. And we have to actually educate people as to how to be in a healthy way skeptical and like anyone like to check resources. So I think that's one way. I have seen that firsthand on WeChat. I ran outreach for all three campaigns. So we looked into different cultural and segments of the population of Victoria, and we pertain like how we campaign towards them. And I had my staff who were on WeChat and spoke the language and could read and they would share crazy things. Like there was something that liberals want to put brothels on every corner. And I was like, well, I didn't do that. But people believe that. And if my parents' English is not their first language, it's easy to be susceptible to that and to play to people's fears. What I did, I took a picture of Bill Blair with a gun and put them all over like penthouses in like Chinese language as well. But so we have our own ways of doing that, but that's how we campaign. But if my staff didn't tell me that, I would not have known that. I would not have seen that. It wasn't on a pamphlet that I saw, but people saw that. And I'm sure there's other, methods like that where you can see that come through.
Tim, I'm going to throw you just something slightly different in the sense that I would attribute some of Poilievre's success to where he's got the party at this point in time, to his ability to question institutions, be it the Bank of Canada, be it the media, certainly the government. Which then, if he's the institution, if he's the guy, if he's running the institutions, it could be a bit of a problem. But is there something that conservatives want to do about writing new laws about speech, particularly in an online environment?
Is this going to Canada's broken or not broken?
Yeah, I guess, yeah, exactly. It's Canada broker. That's
Canada's got a fracture and the cast is coming, I guess. Look, I think there's two ways to look at what the Conservatives want to do. Christine highlighted some of it. You've seen Poilievre associate with people who are huge advocates of free speech as they define it, not as you define it.
As our Constitution defines it.
Well, I might say regulatory bodies have issues with the way Jordan Peterson uses his language and takes his approach to psychology. But,
we intervened in that case as well.
Well, good for you. Jordan Peterson needs more than an intervention, in my personal view. But I think you will see a push for more freedom. That's been a central rallying cry of Poilievre's. Have they worked out what that is? No, I don't think so. I think they're going to get into government and see, and Van Daan has been through this, what the bureaucrats are recommending, what options and the like are there, because what you think you're going to do versus what you can do when you get in are two very different things. The area where I don't think there's been enough focus on what Conservatives may do, and this is speculation, I'm certainly not, as David knows, sitting at the table in there. They wouldn't want to have it in there. But it is something Van Daan just talked about, education and children in particular, harm limitation. I think harm limitation with kids, if Liberals rightly had focus on dealing with drug interdiction and safe sites and supply. The safe supply for the Conservatives is what's coming out of screens and how children are ingesting it and what they may do with it. I have the exact same issue with my kids that Van Daan is talking about with hers. I had one the other day. He was watching apparently a TED talk by a 16-year-old who said, "You don't need to go to school. You can have great success." He said, "Dad, I'm not going to school. I'm just going to be like that kid." I'm like, not a goddamn chance in the world, but I'm going to give you the freedom to view the video and then correct you. But harm and children, I think, will be a focus of the Conservatives.
George, I want to just on the disinformation, misinformation, because again, coming back to the commissions, we had to sit through a New Democrat was a victim. I'm thinking of Jenny Kwan in Vancouver East, targeted in different ways, but there was certainly an online component to the way she was shunned, she felt shunned. And her complaint seemed to be, it was more around federal investigation powers or interest in looking into her situation. She had issues with the Commission of Elections. But give me your thought about where you could see New Democrats trying to fix a problem around online disinformation, misinformation.
Well, again, it's the same balance I think we've all been kind of hinting at, right? And again, the civil liberties, any of these organizations who get involved in these things, 90% of the time we want to support them, and then 10% of the time we're saying, how could you possibly defend the use of swastikas or the N-word, right? Like, and my partner works for the Canadian Association of University Teachers, and so yeah, they're constantly defending professors for saying things that I think are completely abhorrent, but they have the right to say it, so that's the balance, and I think that exists in everything, right? I mean, and going back a little bit. Like I grew up in a time when, Peter Mansbridge got to tell half the country what was important that day. And whether it was Global or CTV or whoever, whoever was anchoring the news that night had a filter that we all and it gave us a kind of a theme and a straight line of what is going on in the world. And so, as a New Democrat, obviously opening up the public square is is largely positive. But again, then you have to go backwards and decide like who, you don't want control of the public square until you see what happens when there's no control. And so it's that balance that I think is constantly a struggle. And, one of the things that I've struggled with a lot, and a lot of the folks in the progressive movements in general fight with is, as Jack said, love is greater than hate. But that's bullshit if you're trying to sell stuff online, right? Like it is easier to sell anger on Twitter. It is easier to sell anger on Facebook and get people to sign up and sign petitions when they're angry than it is to kind of spread a bit more of a positive message. So, and I'm not saying that we're immune to using anger to get things going, but it's just not as naturally part of what we do rather than, hey, the government's broken, right? So saying things need to be torn down is an easier way to sell things. And kind of like to wrap that up, like I remember, I started as a press secretary on the Hill, and it's hard to believe, but without Twitter. You were a leader among that in the press gallery. And a few months in, we got that. And for a long time, like up until 2011, the 2011 election, Twitter was mostly just used for those of us kind of in that part of the world to speak to people in your part of the world. So to speak to the media. It got to the point where I didn't even have to send an advisory out. I would just tweet, we're about to have a press conference, and journalists would show up. And so it was a way to spread news, right? So again, we're still using that old world, traditional media, but it was another platform to spread that news. And now it's replaced it. And as V was saying, like in 2011, we didn't use Twitter at all, except during the debate. And that was just, again, we were just angry. And then slowly those things have come and gone. And I think less and less it is now a way to amplify mass media, and it's just become a replacement. And again, who controls that is both positive and concerning.
And some more breaking news for those who pay attention to what goes on in Halifax. But Halifax City Council yesterday began a debate about whether or not Halifax should get rid of X, not the X in Halifax, but stop using the platform, not Halifax.
There was an explosion in 1970s. That almost happened.
That almost happened. So, I mean, there's a government saying that platform, they said X no longer represents municipal values. However, the people of Halifax City Council want to express municipal values. So, I mean, I find that interesting. I do want to spend some time talking a little bit about, that leads off of our last presentation, about the cost of our digital services, the cost of cell phones, the cost of internet. I think, as everybody knows, Canada is not the cheapest on many services. And that has been a site of political contests. That was one of your, Minister Baines, absolutely. That was one of his big things, was on cost. Maybe you could give us a bit of what was Minister Baines trying to do? He wasn't, I think, as successful as he might have wanted to have been, but he was looking to markets. Professor Geist made the point. Liberals try to be a little more friendly, less confrontational, but give me your view of how things look when from Minister Baines's office.
I would say the goal was to try to bring down costs, because the problem with innovation and industry is that it's such a big ministry, and if you don't focus on one or two key things, like the noise just kind of gets absorbed, right? So something is like kind of sexy. I mean, it's not as sexy as superclusters for some people, but like we really felt like superclusters were sexy, but I don't think they were. But I would say on that, but it was hard to do. It was hard because the government has to engage and give enough incentives to companies to be able to make them want to provide those services and to provide different models where people can have access. Now, I will say that telecom, I don't see it having gone like super like increase. I've seen it kind of stagnant. In some cases, I have seen articles that it has lowered, but nothing that people should feel.
Telecom companies, they lobby us as much as they might say, oh, the prices are staying, but look, you're getting much, the bandwidth is greater, the speeds are faster. You're getting more for the same price. That's their view.
That's their view. And the thing, the problem is where I feel is that the consumer view still isn't that I have more money in my account, right? And that's what matters at the end of the day. So I think what you have to do in the future is you have to continue to work with those companies to provide those incentives. Like, why should you provide a low cost cell phone account that could be basic? And this is a really weird analogy, but I think of, in Toronto, my friend was talking about the big gyms, and they're like $100 a month, and they have something called Fit for Less, which is like $35 a month, and it's like, it's not sexy. There's no sauna. There's nothing. Right. There's just machines, and you leave. There's no eucalyptus towel service. Like, And people can pay for that. It's accessible. So how do we incentivize companies to provide those type of options for like cell phones, for example?
And there's a debate now, I think, and most of the people in this room will know about, it's the only contemporary acronym I know, TPIA, third party internet access. And I know our company does work for some of the players in there, and their concern is as it relates to access infrastructure, who pays for the infrastructure? And access and infrastructure are still big issues outside of the metropolitan areas of Canada, where I'm from, Atlanta, Labrador. You know, a lot of Northern Ontario still doesn't have access. And I remember the early days in debate about the power and benefit of the internet. Half of that debate was about getting it to people. So as it relates to conservatives, I think you'll still see a willingness to, let the regulator oversee things in a responsible way. And I'm not trying to be cute with my language, but with clear direction of policy, interpret policy we've given you. But as it relates to access, both creating the infrastructure, that solely not be the preserve of the bigger companies themselves to do that there's a role for government there, as there was a role for government in running highways to parts of the country that didn't have roads. I think you'll see that being something that's analogous as we go forward with all of this.
Well, just to jump in on that, I mean, that deregulation that we've seen has brought us to this point with this new technology, right? I mean, we're still talking somehow about getting broadband to parts of Canada. I know, the last two speakers of the last session and the last speaker spoke of that as well. But, there was, recently the new leader of the NDP in Saskatchewan, when she was running for her leadership, she was trying to bring back the spirit of Tommy Douglas and talking about how, the Saskatchewan NDP literally paved the roads and turned the lights on in houses across the province, because with public power, a lot of farmhouses didn't have electricity, and so the government said, "This is on us. We have to do this." And it's the only place I think that still has public electricity entirely, just across the country. And I think and I'm sure the New Democrats saying this, but I think in a real way, we need to do that again for infrastructure, for the internet, and for access to people. Because again, as was been said before, but it's worth repeating, like we're sitting here having this conversation. Well, there are folks in this country that can't use their cell phone. We get mad when it goes down to 2 bars somewhere, right? Like they just can't. They can't use the internet at home. And so we need to work on that. And Bell and Rogers and TELUS, they're not going to do that work. And so we need the government to take a more active role in that.
One quick Elon point. So in Labrador, Starlink's the hot thing. Now, it's going to be really interesting seeing what Premier Ford has just done with Starlink, to see where Starlink plays in all of this, because Starlink does have, for remote communities, because it is satellite based, does provide service option. So where does that all go?
It's not just in Newfoundland, Labrador. Like my in-laws.
No, Ben, the whole world is
Northern Ontario too.
But I would say, like even in places that are close to Toronto, like my in-laws are from Haliburton County, and there's areas where they can't get internet, and they used to use Starlink, and it's expensive, and they can do it. That's fine. Although I'm not sure how my father-in-law, who's a farmer, can do it, but he does. But like, it happens. But I think that's a key point for even affordability. Part of the issue is that people have to be in these cities because that's where jobs are. But if you can work from far away and you can have an affordable home and you have access, that can definitely help.
Yeah, well, and you think, the question was asked, who's been to the Arctic? I've been lucky that Stephen Harper used to do a week-long tour in the Arctic, and I was up there 4 or 5 times. And for whatever reason, when there's an election campaign, I've been on that leader's plane when they've dropped into
There's a message in there for you.
Yeah, maybe. No, it's, if you ever get a chance, don't miss your chance to go to Canada's Arctic. It is, it'll blow your mind. But when was our last election? 2021?
Yeah.
I'm in Iqaluit with a campaigning leader, and I'm on a Rogers system, and there's no, at the time, Bell was not going to carry Rogers signal the way that it does down here. So, I mean, that's this year. Yeah, yes, exactly. Listen, Tim may have to leave a little early. I should have pointed that out. So if
Because I'm playing one of those fake journalists.
he's playing a fake journalist.
It comes with a warning when I interview people.
So if he has to get up and leave, that's why he's not being rude. He's just got to go be on radio. Christine, I want to bring you back in the conversation, sort of to a question I asked Michael, which was about all those bills that died. I bet you had some problems with some of them. Did you like anything about, I'm thinking the online harms bill particularly, but was there some things there that you might think a government might be wise to bring back, or no, let's just start all over?
C-63 is not coming back. I think the government had already kind of conceded most of it was dead. The most problematic parts of it were dead. So the bill, of course, did four things. It created the Digital Safety Commission that dealt with I did still have issues with the Digital Safety Commission, which was this large bureaucracy that it was going to create that dealt with I have no issue with finding platforms that don't take down images of child sexual abuse. I think that is totally appropriate and good. It's a good, positive thing. My bigger concern with part one, the Digital Safety Commission, was on the vagueness of takedown for bullying, which is a kind of amorphous term, like what is going to constitute bullying, as well as content that foments hatred, which, as I explained at the beginning, is also a very malleable term.
Context dependent.
Yeah, it can be context dependent. It's also just very subjective, so subjective that our police have difficulty knowing when that standard is met. So those are my issues with part one. Parts 2 and 3 were the amendments to the criminal code that I think everyone in this room probably understands why a civil libertarian would not like increasing life penalties for hate motivated crimes to life imprisonment. It could result in overcharging of more minor offenses. For example, if there was a vandalism offense that included a hate motivation, there could be the ability to overcharge the crime with these huge potential sentences available. It may shock people to learn that the Crown does overcharge crimes. One of the pushbacks I got on that commentary was, well, the Crown can't overcharge. They're not allowed to lay charges they can't make out. It's like, welcome to criminal law, like welcome to the world. That happens all the time. And then the other part was the amendments to the Human Rights Act that were going to allow for a civil remedy for hate speech. That those provisions had been rightly removed after they were abused to make complaints against journalists who said things that today they probably wouldn't have said, like things that Mark Stein had written for Maclean's were subject to these complaints. And the issue with that is that the complaint process becomes the punishment there. So bringing back the civil remedy for hate speech without the complainant bearing any burden and the complaint about individual needing to defend themselves, that's not coming back. Part 4 could have passed on its own on unanimous consent. Those were the penalties for child sexual abuse online and things like the non-consensual sharing of intimate images, or what people call revenge porn. But it's not porn. Porn is compensated and consensual. This is non-consensual sharing as a form of emotional and psychological abuse, largely of women. So I don't think that there was any concern among the Conservatives of passing Part 4. I think that the Liberals' tying of Part 4 to the highly controversial and unpopular and politicized, largely Parts 2 and 3 of the Online Harms Act, to me, was cynical. It indicates a lack of seriousness of addressing child sexual abuse. I think that there is a possibility Part 4 could come back in some form, since Michelle Rempel-Gardner did propose something that was kind of worse, actually, but similar.
Yeah. Does that strike you, Tim, that you mentioned that a little earlier when we were chatting, that there is conservatives, Arnold Veerson's another one, Michelle Rempel, who have had an interest in prohibiting that kind of activity online?
You see the tendency with conservatives is to go, use their term, hard on law and order issues. So if Christine is describing it as overreach, I wouldn't be surprised if there was a bit more. And you saw it last week on fentanyl. Now, emotionally, I love what they're talking about doing on fentanyl, but I'm sure Christine and her organization and others will look and say, you can't really have a life sentence for somebody who is pushing a certain amount of
I think
drugs.
the amount that they proposed
40.
amounted to like 8 pills or something like that.
Yeah.
I just don't think that's what a fentanyl kingpin is. And
Yeah, but I think they will make the emotional argument and
Right.
let the system sort out the legal propriety.
Can I ask you before you go, and I might like to hear you guys on online arms if you can, but before you go, who do you see looking around as leaders in the Conservative caucus that are already maybe providing some ideas to the Polyev team about innovation, about telecom competition, any number of some of the issues you've taught today? Are there some folks there that people here might want to pay a little more attention to as in their parliamentary work or whatever they might be doing?
Well, I don't think there's a specialist that I could point to. Is there a Jim Prentice, for example? And some of you will know the reference to Jim, who was Minister of Industry and had a lot of
James Moore was
James
pretty
Moore
good.
in the day.
Yeah.
But they grew into those roles.
Mhm.
You know, the more thoughtful, and this is not to diminish people in the entirety of the caucus for not being thoughtful, but people who thought about more policy than politics, who could be involved in something like this, are sort of the obvious ones, although this name won't be Adam Chambers. You know Adam, there with Jim Flaherty, writing the Conservative platform at the moment, has seen and done a lot and seen a lot of how government works, doesn't work. Also father of some young children, living the reality of technology and teaching and growing. Lanceman, Melissa, I think, is another one. Worked in the corporate world, will have advised people.
Also worked in Flaherty's office.
Yeah, also I will have worked in this space. You know, the people who come in, new candidates, none of them really jump out at me now. Those would be the two that I think, and they often get referenced, but they're also very accessible. There will be others, of course. I give the normal rider that just because somebody's a shadow minister, doesn't suggest that they will have a full cabinet role. But I've only got two for you this morning, David.
Well, it's Adam Chambers is the MP for Simcoe North, he's a young man, and you could see him being an industry minister perhaps. He's got that sort of, it seems.
Yeah, I think he will
thoughtfulness
play,
about
again, picking cabinet is a very dangerous
It's
thing.
my favorite
When you
pundit's
don't
game
get,
to play.
I know you love it, but when you don't get to pick the cabinet yourself, you may have favorites, but yeah, he's somebody who could be considered. But I think if Polyev becomes the prime minister,
And Polyev himself, of course, has thought about cryptocurrency.
yeah,
right?
he's
Early on,
thought,
some thoughts there.
and he will tell you he's thought about a lot about technology, its implications in its various forms, and I think he will have his hands involved in anything that deals with harms children, free access. I think he will probably play a role in all of that. But with that, I will excuse myself. Thank
Yes.
you, everybody. Apologize for leaving 10 minutes early, but I have to go pretend I'm David Aiken, and that role is very difficult to fit.
Have fun, Tim. He's talking to Bonnie Crombie. I'd like to hear that conversation actually, but there you go. Looking ahead, maybe we'll just sort of wrap up, and what can you see Liberals might want to campaign on if you were providing a platform for the election we're going to have? Are there some things that you think would hit that sweet spot of getting a voter interested and actually being good policy too? I know that's be a real tall order.
Yeah, you're asking me to write the platform, but
Yes, that's right.
and perhaps I might. But I would say the first policy will often just be what people are talking about, which could be tariffs, affordability. That's what that's what probably if this election is in, I would think like next month. Like then that's what you're looking at. I would find that's where you look for the platform pieces. So I think anything that will show that openness to a change or a shift or on how we approach digital policy, privacy, AI, etc. I think will be important. The most important thing also do people hear that, and do they feel like they can work with this version of the government, with this leader, and is there thoughtful pieces about that? So I don't think there's anything specific they would cover. I think they would, but I think all parties, all leaderships are going to focus in on misinformation from a cybersecurity perspective in terms of like state actors. And I think that's where Canada's at right now. I think people are really worried about what's happening in the US. I think looking at China and Russia and other actors and how they influence our systems. So I think the main piece, what you'll hear about is probably like how do we protect Canadian systems, including our online systems from those actors.
George, how about you? Write the New Democratic platform for us.
I have about as much influence over that as
I know.
Tim has over the Conservative platform.
Tweet it.
Yeah. If anyone's still reading it. But I agree with me. I think a lot of that will be about foreign interference. It'll be stuff about Musk, and that kind of thing. I think just one of the points that Tim brought up, and it's easy to debate him when he's gone, But no, I think that some of this conversation is going to parallel a lot of what we've seen in the criminal court, right? So things like mandatory minimums, where there's so many reasons why those are problematic, but they're such an easy political sell, and so conservatives lean on those quite a bit. And for instance, I remember having a conversation a long time ago with a former justice critic of ours, who was a well-respected lawyer who wanted to oppose, the conservatives were bringing in mandatory minimums on sexual assault on children, and out of principle he wanted to oppose the mandatory minimum, saying judges have the right to, like, we can throw these guys away forever for sure, but the judge should make that decision. I was like, yeah, well, we're not voting against that, right? And you're right, but politics is politics, so go back to being a lawyer if you're gonna make that argument. Otherwise, we're voting with these guys on this.
Yeah.
And I think that some of that, I worry, to be honest, some of that's going to happen. It's already happening, and it's going to continue to happen, I think, in the cybersecurity world. So as much as our platform, I think, will be around that, like billionaires coming after us and foreign interference, I think a lot of the debate will be around where the conservatives want to push it, and trying to stay on the right side of the politics while also trying to be aware of what's right on principle.
And Christian, I want to twist it a little bit for you, because it's my view, just sort of reporting on politics, that whatever happened out of the Freedom Convoy, good or bad, a whole lot more Canadians started thinking about their freedom of expression, their ability to protect their own online information. And you were saying, sort of, when you survey people, that I'm curious that people are talking about the things your organization has been talking about. And it seems to me there's a much more heightened awareness and a concern among a voter who is probably going to ask the politicians their opinions about, again, protecting my privacy and protecting my ability to express myself.
Yeah, so there's a lot of concern among our supporters for freedom of expression. There's selection bias in that, obviously.
Yeah.
Like, we're a
But
civil
it's-
liberties group there.
But it's changed over, I would say, the last 4 or 5 years. There's more supporters, more.
Well, I've only been with the organization for 5 years, so
Okay.
it's consistently been a concern, and it's always been a big part of our mandate. But what I'd like to say about that, I think, is that freedom of expression is not a threat to democracy. It is a foundation to democracy. Without the right to express ourselves, we don't have a democracy or functioning government. It's a nonpartisan.
You've used that in front of a judge. That's a great line. Oh, yeah.
It is also a nonpartisan right. So I hope that everyone on this platform can agree that freedom of expression is a right for everyone. It's right for people on the left. It's traditionally been used as a power of those on the left to push back against the state for violating their fundamental rights. Martin Luther King famously was a proponent of peaceful, nonviolent protest and used that to fundamentally change the civil rights landscape in the United States. It's not a right just for the people who opposed vaccine mandates in Ottawa in January of 2022, but they were subject to unconstitutional violations of their right to expression and their right to be free from an unreasonable search when the government, without a warrant, without prior notice, and without any appeal mechanism, which are all what are required under the standards of criminal law for a search, which is what this was, froze their bank accounts and required banks and financial institutions to share that information with police. That should frighten everyone on every side of the political spectrum, because you don't want your government, even if people in this room disagree with the purposes of the Freedom Convoy or the tactics of the Freedom Convoy. I'm not here to defend blockading roads or honking horns late into the night. That's not what we were there to do in that litigation. We were there to defend the right of these individuals to protest to the extent that there were peaceful protests. It was largely nonviolent, but of course the police had authority to remove those vehicles and should have done so. And the use of the Emergencies Act was completely inappropriate. The threshold wasn't met, and the regulations created under it were unconstitutional. So I think that was one of the biggest civil liberties violations in a generation. It's a huge case that we were arguing in the Court of Appeal last week, and it should concern everyone.
Also, yeah, I guess I was trying to make was that wasn't under a barrel. that was a very public, that was a national story where those issues were talked about, not just by lawyers, but by the political class, and I would argue that Polyev has taken a lot of the anger about those violations and made it popular. Did you have some thought on that?
I actually think, I don't think freedom of expression is under attack in terms of the legal sense. I think the issue is there are people who want to hear things and call that hate speech and they're not. And there are people who want to engage in hate speech and they don't want to be told they can't. And I think what I am curious about in the online space is me and Tim are often not opposite sides, but we can go for a beer, we can talk about it, we can laugh about it, it's fine. In the online space, how do you recreate that and how do you have these conversations with people, and goes back to education. I think the problem is with the worries I have with the online space that you can stay in a tunnel of what you want to hear and not talk to anyone else who thinks differently of you. And we've forgotten how to have these conversations with each other. I think COVID-19, things that happened in the Middle East, like they exacerbated those issues. So I think one thing that, and I don't have an answer to this, but I think we should be thinking about is how do we bring back those conversations? I think the problem is people don't want to people don't want to see us sitting next to each other and having a healthy debate about something where new ideas can come through. They want to only hear their opinion, and that's what I worry about in the digital space, and we have to figure out how to.
But it's not, that's not for the government, honestly, it's not for the government to
No,
solve.
not
That's
for
like a civil
That's a civil
society
society thing.
issue, and I
Yes.
agree 100%, I would love civil discourse. I
Yeah.
do kind of
Yeah.
have a sense that civil discourse is dead in this current.
I have,
getting
more, I
worse.
have more positivity on it. I hope it is, but I agree. It's not for someone to like litigate or legislate on that. I think that also just causes more. What I've learned is that causes more disruption and fracture. And I think the Prime Minister said himself, like there are words he would have chosen differently. And when people just when you take a hard hand to it, I think people just generally want to push back on it. So how do we bring those ideas and have these conversations that still also actually attack hate speech or things that create acts of hate?
But just really quickly, challenges we currently have, it's particularly with algorithms, and like you hinted at that at the beginning, is that I mean, I know we talk about this, but it's very real how centralized and unified the message that's fed back to you becomes. I mean, because of the way I started on Twitter. I followed all kinds of people from other political parties. I followed journalists. I had a fairly diverse, and so I heard about this, but I thought it's not that bad. And then my Twitter got hacked a little while ago, and so I came back on and I have far fewer followers and I follow far fewer people. And I saw that, and you start seeing, oh well, everyone agrees with me. It's kind of like being at a like an NDP convention, although we don't all agree there either. But the same thing happened. Like when I saw a friend of mine, an old friend of mine who was part of the convoy. And I went into his Facebook and I was seeing the stuff that he was sharing. Like I didn't even know that people were arguing that Anthony Fauci wasn't really a doctor. And he was convinced it's true, right? And it's because he's like every source he checks confirms his bias. And I think that's like it's not just about going and having a beer, it's about being in a world where you hear other opinions.
Yeah.
And online, when all you hear are the things that agree with you, folks think that they're informing themselves on an issue, but they're really just talking to everybody who agrees with them. And I think the more those algorithms do that, and again, they do it because it's these platforms make money by marketing and selling ads, so it has to work that way. That's how we lose the public discourse. You don't even hear that people disagree because all you ever hear feedback on is that. And I think we're seeing that now with trans issues. I'm working on a campaign in Oshawa. I drove in for this and the session later, but we've had people come in and they're convinced that what they're hearing Donald Trump say is true because they've looked into it, they've searched it on the internet. And everybody says the same thing, and that's the problem.
And with that, I'm going to thank you very much to everybody. And I'll just my last thought was, I mentioned early in the day when it was the 90s, even the 80s. I started as a tech reporter, and I would get to talk to some of the people who were creators of the world, the Bill Gateses, the Steve Jobs, the Bob Metcalfs. And the feeling back then, I went to lots of hacker conferences in the United States, know a lot of hackers, the good kind. And they thought, oh, this whole digital stuff will free China. It'll break communism down. That's what digital everything means. It'll be a freedom enabler. And I come back to Bill Gates in source code, now writing how naive we all were, those of us building the systems we now use 20, 25 years ago. He singles out social networking as an evil, but he also suggests that I think this is part of the goal of some of the things today is to think as people who work in tech policy, digital policy, building digital systems, the very real world effects of all the work that you may all be doing. And keep our eyes open and our heads up. I don't know if that's a cheery message, but I'll close on that.